A knock came at the door that didn't sound like a friend. Inside the small apartment near the University of Florida, the night routine was already settling in. Books put down, a light left on, the quiet that comes when college kids are finally off the clock. Then the door gave way. A man forced his way inside, moving fast, carrying a knife, controlling the room with sudden violence. Minutes later, two students who should have been worrying about classes and rent were dead on the floor, and the killer had vanished back into the darkness of Gainesville. Late August of 1990 was the first week of a new semester, the time when campus life usually feels open and full. Students were arriving, unpacking, and walking to their first parties. Gainesville was a college town used to strangers, used to late-night noise and people coming and going. That normal rhythm made it easier for a predator to blend in, to move through neighborhoods without drawing attention. The first known attack happened on August 24th. Sonia Larson, an 18-year-old freshman, and Christina Powell, a 17-year-old student, were inside Larson's apartment at the Campus Walk complex. The attacker entered, stabbed them, and left them dead in a scene that immediately terrified investigators for its brutality. It wasn't just a murder. It was an invasion, carried out in a place where young people assumed the door was enough. The news spread fast through the student community, but it came with confusion. People wanted to believe it was isolated, a personal dispute, a one-time crime. Parents called, friends checked locks, students began traveling in groups and double-checking windows, police increased patrols. But the killer was not finished. 2 nights later, on August 26th, the pattern returned in a way that made it impossible to dismiss. Krista Hoyt, a 21-year-old student, lived in an apartment near campus. She was alone. The attacker broke in and murdered her. What investigators found at the scene was chilling, not only because of the violence, but because of evidence of post-mortem staging. The killer wasn't simply trying to escape. He was taking time, controlling the scene, leaving behind a message of domination that would haunt the people who had to walk into that room. Now Gainesville shifted from concern to panic. Students packed bags and went home. Some refused to stay alone, others moved mattresses into living rooms so roommates could sleep together. Phone lines in student housing stayed busy through the night. University officials and police tried to reassure the community while admitting they were dealing with something unpredictable. Every unlocked window became a threat. Every unfamiliar footstep outside an apartment became a reason to freeze. On August 27th, the killer struck again. Manuel Taboada, a 23-year-old student, and Tracy Pauls, also 23, were in Pauls's apartment. The attacker entered and murdered them both with a knife, again inside a private home where they had believed they were safe. The 2 bodies brought the total to 5 victims in 4 days. Gainesville was no longer a college town settling into a semester. It was a hunting ground. Investigators worked with urgency. They gathered reports of prowlers. They processed scenes for fingerprints, shoe impressions, and other trace evidence. They interviewed friends and neighbors and tried to reconstruct the killer's movements. The short window between attacks suggested someone comfortable with risk, someone who could strike and disappear without being noticed. Police released information carefully, balancing public safety with the fear that too much detail might fuel panic or compromise the investigation. In the middle of this, the community tried to protect itself. Students bought extra locks. People slept with lights on. Parents drove in from other cities to pick up their kids. Rumors ran wild. Descriptions of suspicious men, stories of vans, claims of near misses that could not be confirmed. The fear wasn't abstract. It was physical. It lived in hallways, in the sound of keys in a lock, in the pause before opening a door. The murders went unsolved in the immediate aftermath, and that uncertainty became its own kind of wound. Eventually, the investigation connected the killings to Danny Harold Rowling, a drifter with a violent history. Rowling had been arrested in September 1990 after a bank robbery in Ocala, Florida, and was serving time when investigators later tied him to Gainesville through evidence and confessions. In 1994, Rowling pleaded guilty to the 5 murders and detailed aspects of the crimes in court. He was sentenced to death. For the families, the guilty plea did not bring back what had been taken. Sonia Larson never got her freshman year. Christina Powell never reached adulthood. Krista Hoyt never finished the life she was building. Manuel Taboada and Tracy Pauls never walked back into their apartment again. Gainesville carried the memory of those days as a warning, a reminder that violence can erupt in ordinary places without explanation. The case entered popular culture in a way that made some people uncomfortable. Elements of the crimes, along with the atmosphere of fear they created, were cited as inspiration for later horror fiction, including the film Scream. But for the survivors and the families, the story was never entertainment. It was real doors forced open, real blood on floors, real phone calls in the middle of the night, and a community that spent days waiting for the next knock. After the last killings, detectives were flooded with tips. Students and neighbors called in descriptions of strangers near stairwells, men lingering by parked cars, footsteps outside windows at odd hours. Patrol cars swept through apartment complexes at night, while investigators tried to separate fear from usable information. They processed each scene for fingerprints, shoe impressions, and trace evidence, building a timeline that suggested forced entry, a knife attack, and time spent in the apartments after the victims were dead. The university tried to keep life moving, but the town changed. Off-campus apartments emptied as parents drove in to take their children home. Roommates made new rules about locks, windows, and never opening a door without checking first. The murders stopped as abruptly as they began, and that was almost worse, because no one knew whether the killer had left, been arrested for something else, or was simply waiting. Danny Rowling was not identified in the first days of the investigation. He was arrested weeks later in Ocala after an armed bank robbery, and only later was he connected to the Gainesville murders through the continuing investigation, physical evidence, and his own admissions. In 1994, Rowling pleaded guilty to the 5 killings and was sentenced to death. The legal process stretched for years, but for the families and surviving friends, the story never moved on in neat stages. It remained the sound of a forced door, the suddenness of a knife, and the empty space left behind in 5 lives that should have kept going. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.